Welcome to Heroes and Patriots, a program about national security, intelligence, and foreign policy. Today is Thursday, November 5th, 2020, and we are coming to you live from the studios of KMUD Community Radio in Northern California. I'm Mary Massey with co-host John Sakowicz. We want to thank our show engineer, Dorothy Sakur, and the KMUD staff and volunteers for making today's program and all programs possible. Today, we also had help from Jennifer Gore. Thank you, Jennifer. This show and all programs will be archived here at KMUD and at our show website, heroespatriots.org. Listener calls and emails are welcome and encouraged. To speak with our guest today, call 707-923-3911, or you may email your questions to heroesandpatriots@gmail.com. Please be brief with your questions on air and be sure to turn your radio volume down. John, we survived the November 3rd election. Good morning.
Good morning, Mary, and good morning, listeners. I can't wait for our two guests. Our second guest, Rick Smith, is a friend of mine. He's won two Pulitzers as a bureau chief for the New York Times in Washington and in Russia, and an Emmy for being an executive producer at PBS's Frontline. These are absolutely top-tier A-list guests. I am so happy to be doing this show today.
Today's show is about the lead up to November 3rd and where we find ourselves today. Jeff Cohen is with us this morning. Jeff is a media critic and lecturer, founding director of Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College. He founded the Media Watch Group, FAIR, F-A-I-R, in 1986 and co-founded the online activist group Rootsactionorg in 2011. We have Jeff on the line now, and so we're going to jump right in. Good morning, Jeff.
Great to be with you.
Great to have you with us. Could you just kind of give us just a knee-jerk reaction of what you've seen so far leading up to the election and now where we find ourselves?
Well, I had been hoping for more. I had been hoping for a rejection of Trump that was totally clear. We haven't got that. There's 70 million of our compatriots who believe he's some sort of savior. He's a good guy. He tells the truth. It's very dangerous to me that there's such a huge media apparatus that has promoted Trump. Another thing is the Democrats, by comparison, just don't arouse enthusiasm. Mm-hmm. Biden, as the head of the ticket, did not arouse much enthusiasm. I think more people on the Biden voting for Biden were voting against Trump than they were voting for Biden. On the other side, there's all this enthusiasm because people actually think that this con man, Donald Trump, is some sort of savior who cares about working people. So it's really cockeyed. But what's really disappointing to me is the Senate, where the Democrats had hoped to take the Senate. But I think the lack of enthusiasm for Biden sort of drove down all the other Democratic candidates. They actually lost seats in the U.S. House.
Right.
And I think that's a reflection that there's a lot more spirit on the right wing than there is in the corporate liberal. There's just not as much energy behind the Democratic side than there is on the right wing, and that's got to change.
Jeff, I love your work, and I love you because you're so outspoken, and I want you to be brutally honest on this program. I'm going to ask some tough questions, and I really want your answers. I think the problem with the Democratic Party is that it's led by old white people who, Nancy Pelosi can't have any more facelifts than she's already had. Joe Biden can't have any more facelifts than he's already had, and hair plugs and cosmetic dentistry. And these are our leaders. We don't have youth. We don't have diversity. We don't have color. We don't have energy. We don't have motivation. We just have a vote against Trump, and that's just not enough. Do you agree?
100%. You really nailed it. I mean, I'm a senior. You're a senior. But Pelosi, Hoyer, and Clyburn, the three Democratic leaders in the House, I think there's 79, 80, and 81. And again, the pushing against the diverse, younger, progressive Democrats, it doesn't just come from Fox News. it comes from MSNBC and CNN, where you're constantly told that AOC is too radical and she'll turn people off, and the Green New Deal will turn people off, and Medicare for All is going to turn people off. So you get this bombardment from the right-wing media and the corporate liberal media. I include NPR, MSNBC, CNN, the New York Times. You get this bombardment that progressive solutions are not popular. The most interesting thing to me on election night, and you could see the gloom at Fox News when they reported their results of their extensive national voter survey analysis, where they asked people where they stood on the issues. And they asked people, do you support changing to a government-run national health care plan? 71% said yes. So again, the reason we can't get a progressive movement going is because too many people who consider themselves liberal progressive, they watch CNN, they watch MSNBC, they're told, oh, Bernie is too radical. I go to Canada a lot with my movies. Why is Bernie a radical, they ask me. And he's right here, he'd be mainstream, and Canada is not exactly a Leninist country. So you get this bombardment from the media that makes us think that the Warrens and the AOCs and the Rashida Tlaibs and the Bernie Sanders are somehow too radical, when actually that's the only way we'll get spirit on our side to match the spirit that the right wing has behind this charlatan Donald Trump.
Right. And to your point, the Democrats lost a few seats in the House, and the seats they lost were moderate Democrats. They did not lose the progressive Democrats. The progressive Democrats, the squad, won handily.
And the squad is bigger now than ever. I mean, the reality is we need to get to a point where there's a progressive movement and viewpoint that the American public gets to hear, and the right-wing reactionary divisive viewpoint. I believe that people will choose the progressive viewpoint, but all they ever hear is talk about the progressive viewpoint rather than the viewpoint itself. So you get told how unpopular Green New Deal, Medicare for All, taxing the rich, free public college, wiping out college debt. But the mainstream media's own polls, which they generally push aside, say that those are popular issues. And that's what sickens me, that these are very popular, and yet the corporate Democrats obviously will not run on these popular issues.
You know, it wasn't always this way, that the cable news channels were basically putting out a message that their owners, if you will, the money behind these networks, it wasn't always this way. When was the change from, the media reporting what a legitimate candidate is about and versus controlling the message?
Yeah. I think it's gotten worse. It was never great in corporate-owned media, but obviously the corporations have taken over. Half a dozen corporations have taken over the media. And on the issue of, to me, the reason that there is this progressive movement and there is this squad is because of independent media, whether it's KMUD or Amy Goodman or the Young Turks or thenation.com or Counterpunch, Common Dreams. There's been a boom in independent, non-corporate media, but most people still rely on corporate media. And you have a lot of progressives who still believe in MSNBC. When I talk to them, I say, isn't it interesting that the main reason independent media are growing and independent politics is because of the internet? And you never hear about how the owners of MSNBC, Comcast, have been working hand in glove. They're supposed to be the anti-Trump channel, MSNBC and CNN. The owners of MSNBC are working hand in glove with Trump to do away with net neutrality, to make sure that websites they disfavor, dislike, that don't pay them, that they don't own, get pushed into the slow lane. The only reason net neutrality hasn't come to be is because it's tied up in the courts. But Comcast, which owns MSNBC, and AT&T, which owns Time Warner, CNN, they never talk about net neutrality, and it's because of ownership.
Good point.
Jeff, we have a caller. We want as many people that we can take calls from at 707-923-3911. Caller, you are on the air. Go ahead with your question.
Oh, thank you so much. Jeff, I
Yes.
fully agree that at some point in this country we should have a progressive agenda, but I want to suggest a really good a constructively critical reading of Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, which suggests that we have a ways to go. And I'd like you to comment on the fact that an old white man won on the Republican side and that a lot of non-white people also voted for him. So I'm wondering if, a progressive agenda, while it's great, will not win until probably the 2040s. I'd just like you to see, how are you going to build I'd like to know through Roots Action, which is a really great group, how are you going to what are the confidence-building measures that you would propose to bring along not only the progressives, but a larger section of the country so that we could have a different agenda at work?
Thank you,
caller. How are you going to reach out to the people who have not been reaching the Democrats?
Rootsactionorg. That's the activist group I work with.
I know.
I think it's slightly exaggerated that Trump won a lot of voters of color. I think he got 12 or 13% of the African American vote. That's still a landslide for the other side. And Latinos, I think, was about 30% for Trump, and that includes a lot of the right-wing Cubans in Florida. But you're right. We need to build this progressive agenda and get it to the American people, especially working class people of all races, of all colors. And I'm optimistic. The first demand, if Biden gets in, the first demand is raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. That should happen within 2 months. That's something that would get the multiracial working class to see, Trump didn't do that, but the Democrats did that. So that's one thing. And of course, this progressive squad is growing. They talked about a squad of 4 women of color in the Congress, AOC, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib from Michigan, Ilhan Omar from Minnesota. Now we have a bunch more progressives who are in there, and I think they've got to raise hell, and I think they need to take over the leadership of the Democratic Party in the House, because as John said, it's a very old, very white leadership in the House. We need a more diverse, more energetic, youthful House Democratic leadership.
It's 15 minutes past the hour. We are speaking with Jeff Cohen this morning, and we do want to take your calls at 707-923-3911. John?
Yes, we were speaking with Robert Reich earlier in the week about his predictions, et cetera. And he predicted that Biden would win by a whisker, but that he would be what he calls, and what you certainly agree, would be a transitional rather than a transformational president. He won't change the underlying power structure in the country because they own them. All the big donors, Silicon Valley, Wall Street. He won't lead a movement. Biden will be more of a bridge to the next generation of leaders, by which Robert Reich believes that he'll try to stabilize the country and heal some of the nation's wounds, but that he'll be turning over the keys to the visionaries and the movement builders in the future. My question is, how soon will that happen?
Yeah, you've asked a good question, because when I heard you phrasing the question, I was saying, well, we don't have much time, right? Especially when it comes to climate catastrophe.
Great minds think alike.
Yeah, we're running out of time, and Reich is correct that this is he's basically a status quo transitional figure. What was fascinating to me in the media is you had Thomas Friedman, who's a darling on MSNBC and CNN from the New York Times, and Brit Hume, who's the right-wing darling on Fox News. And they were both happy that the Republicans have the Senate and Biden might be the president and nothing fundamentally will change. Well, the reality for those of us who are suffering and those who care about climate catastrophe is we don't have time for years and years of the status quo. And it is fascinating that they're thrilled about divided government. You know, Tom Friedman at the Times and MSNBC and CNN, he was happy that the Republicans, that Mitch McConnell is in charge of the Senate and Joe Biden, a pretty corporate centrist, may be in the White House. He likes that because the status quo won't be challenged.
Thank you, Jeff. We have another caller for you. Caller, if you can hear me, go ahead with your question.
Actually, I'm going to go ahead because the caller couldn't wait. So that's a question from Lauren, our news girl. And she's wondering why the Guardian and the Associated Press, which are supposed to be alternative media here, right? Why do they have different numbers than the corporate medias about how much Biden still have to do to win or stuff like that?
I think the only difference is that Fox News and Associated Press on election night called Arizona for Biden, and no one else has done that.
Right.
And the White House was incensed at Fox News for calling Arizona for saying that Biden had won Arizona. And I sure hope that on this one thing, that Fox News turns out to be right, and Associated Press. They both called, they said Biden's going to win Arizona, and they did it on election night.
Okay, we have another caller. Caller, if you can hear me, go ahead with your question.
Hi, is this me?
It is you. Go ahead with your question.
Oh, yeah. I was wondering if you noticed the 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris, where the person that was interviewing her asked her about her progressive liberal stances in a manner that she was accusing her of a crime. She literally sounded like she was accusing her of a crime when she asked her about how progressive and liberal. And poor Kamala looked like a deer in the headlights, like, oh, yeah, like she was instructed to stay away from progressive liberal policies as much as possible and have nothing to do with them. And they called her a socialist, like she was a communist. Are you a socialist? You know, and it's anyway. And I also wanted to know if you noticed that Donald Trump in his rallies had Bernie Sanders speaking as a guest more than anybody else. He kept putting Bernie Sanders debate snips on to take down Joe Biden in his rally.
Thank you, caller.
Yeah, I want to say you really nailed it when you talk about how the corporate centrist media, they make it accusatory if politicians take progressive positions, even if their own polls show how popular these things are. And it's a myth that
news.
Medicare for all is not popular. If you're with Medicare for all, it's too left-wing. How are you going to win people over? And they never look at their own polls. How many times did you hear in the mainstream media that Biden is going to risk losing Pennsylvania if he doesn't come out in support of fracking?
Right.
Well, most of the state of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth, they're against fracking. And it's in the mainstream media's polls. Again, Medicare for all is hugely popular. Infrastructure jobs, green jobs from the federal government, popular. Taxing the rich, popular. Raising the federal minimum wage, popular. Free public college and wiping out college debt, popular. All of these things are doable. But when you watch the mainstream debates within the Democratic Party, the primary debates, how many times did you hear Bernie Sanders being asked, how expensive is your Medicare for all going to cost? How much is it going to be? But every economist that's looked at it says if we stick with the status quo, with private insurance, huge corporate insurance company profits, huge bureaucracy caused by the 88 different plans from 33 different corporations, it's the status quo that costs more money than Medicare for all. But Biden was never pressed. How much is it going to cost if we stick with private insurance as the center of our healthcare system? He wasn't asked that question once, but Bernie and Warren were asked repeatedly, her Medicare for all. If a country in Canada, no richer than ours, can have Medicare for all working beautifully for 40 years, why can't we? And the other thing, Green New Deal, the mainstream media, including the liberals, beat it into your head that it's going to be too costly. There's nothing more costly than the status quo that's filled with all of these climate disasters. We're losing billions and billions of dollars to fires, floods, hurricanes. And if we do not have a Green New Deal fast, it will be far more costly in the long run. But in the media propaganda system, you never hear these commonsensical points made.
Jeff, I came of age working in the national security community during the Reagan era. I was hired by Buzzy Krongard in 1979 and had a long career. And I still have a lot of friends who are conservative Republicans, and they have a lot of concerns about the future of the republic. And these are reasonable people. These are smart people. And they'll say to me, if the Democrats had won the Senate, what we're facing basically is the loss of the republic. And I'll say, well, how do you figure? What's your logic? And they'll say, well, Biden and Congress will pack the courts. He'll expand the number of justices on the Supreme Court. He'll pack the Senate by making the Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, giving them statehood, and he'll pack the voting public by waving in 20 million new American voters, giving naturalization status to all the undocumented people out there. So a lot of my friends are very, very afraid right now. What would you say to them just to calm them down and to just root their feet in reality?
Well, I would say that social reform does not mean the end of the republic. In Northern Europe, there are many countries that are much more stable than ours that have implemented these social reforms. The Bernie Sanders agenda is not a revolutionary, crazy agenda. It's basically mainstream, slow social reform. And so I would argue that, Washington, D.C. should be a state. It's far bigger than all these other existing states. And there's nothing wrong with integrating immigrants into our society and giving them a path to citizenship. What I would try to assure your right-wing friends, your Republican friends, is slow reform is good for the republic. This kind of chaos where we never address any of our social problems, that's going to bring the republic down. That's the argument I would make. It's
evolution. That's what I say. It's simple evolution.
We've got about 3 minutes and another caller. Caller, if you could be brief, go ahead with your question.
It's been 40 years. I've been waiting for Bernie to actually pull something off. Both parties are pretty much defunct. Is there any possibility of an independent party changing things, or do you actually have hope that either party, Democrat or Republican, has any salvageable aspects whatsoever? Thanks.
Yeah,
I'll take it off.
Because we have winner take all. Thanks for the question. Because we have winner take all elections, it's very hard for a third party to get in. So what I'm excited about is these people are running as social democrats, democratic socialists, and they're getting elected to Congress within the Democratic Party. If AOC had run as a Green Party, we would not know her name. So I think it's been a successful tactic to run as a progressive Democrat and put forward the Bernie agenda, the full social reform agenda, because working people want to hear that agenda.
Jeff, we have about a minute and a half. We want to touch base on your organization, your online Rootsaction.org. Would you talk about that briefly in the minute or so we have left?
Yeah, Rootsaction.org is an independent progressive group. We're over 1 million strong. Anyone can go on and sign up. All we need is your email address and your zip code. That's all. You can sign up on the homepage of Rootsaction.org. We fight for independent progressive change. We did the Vote Trump Out movement that you probably saw all over social media if you're on Facebook or Twitter. It was Vote Trump Out and then challenge Biden from day one. Voting Trump out, let's hope that happened. And then let's understand that real politics begins after the election, when we push for a social reform agenda that can appeal to the multiracial working class and to the young people. That's the future of the Democratic Party, is young voters, progressive voters, and multiracial working class voters.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff, we want to thank you for joining us today. It's been a quick half hour, and we do want you to come back maybe in another month or so to see where we ended up after the election, if we can know by then. And
I sure hope we do.
Yeah, I agree.
Jeff, you're a great guest. Thank you so much for coming on our show.
Thanks so much. You guys do a great job. And donors, support KMUD with your donations. We need independent media.
Thank you, Jeff.